Happy January, everybody. I think everybody's probably in pretty much the same boat today, unless you're from one of those warm countries where it doesn't get cold. But in the South here, we're freezing. Well, I should say in northeast Georgia, it's a little bit colder than we're accustomed to. So nevertheless, here we are, and it's the first of the year, and we're going to launch the year with a chat as we normally do. And if you notice, it's actually the third Sunday. We're on schedule. So welcome you all. How about checking in? Let me know who's here and
where you're from.
Where you're from would be really fun today. What part of the country are you from? Are you below zero or are you in the 70s? That sort of thing. That would be fun. While we're waiting for folks to come in, just a reminder of how our chats work, as we always do. The way the chat works is anybody who can log on to YouTube can watch a chat. Members can ask questions. We would like for it to be possible for subscribers to ask questions too, but then that would create more questions than we'd be able to manage. And so having members ask questions is our way of controlling traffic. And that's just the way we have to do it. To become a member, what do you do to become a member? You join. Under every YouTube video, every one of ours. I'm not interested in everybody else's. Underneath our videos are somewhere in that vicinity, depending upon what kind of instrument you're using to log on. You'll see the word live, the word join somewhere. And you click on that word join, and you can become a Studio Insider member for $4.99 a month, which is really a good bargain, considering that you also, when you're a Studio Insider member, you get a free lesson every month from our lessons site, DianneMize.com. And then also the members get to ask questions here, and you get a free snippet of a little teaser of a tip. Every second Sunday, every first Sunday, you get the coupon for your free video. Every second Sunday, you get a snippet. Every third Sunday, we have the chat, unless we postpone it to fourth Sunday. And that's what the members get for their $4.99 a month. So you can unsubscribe if you're not happy. We don't advise that. We hope that we can keep you happy. So we see folks coming in, and what do we have? Marcia from Anchorage. Wow, 12 degrees Fahrenheit. Welcome to our world. And then with Cheryl. Hi, Diane and Roger. Hi, Cheryl. I bet it's about 14 below there in Montana where you are. And Debbie's coming in. Hi, Debbie. So glad to see folks logging on. So the topic today is knowing your tube colors. That is maybe a little mysterious to some people. You think, well, I already know my tube colors. Well, if you do, maybe you can just sort of sing along with us, sing the chorus with us as we sing it to the audience. And there comes Maurice. Hi, Maurice. Okay, so that's the topic today, knowing your tube colors. And it involves something like this, and we'll get onto it in just a moment. I always think of painting as being so parallel to other skills, and with cooking is a really good parallel for knowing your tube colors, because when you're cooking, if you're adding spices to your food, you want to know what that spice tastes like before you add it in, and you want to know how much. Some spices are stronger than others, carry more, will affect the food more strongly than others, and so you'll want to know how much of spice it takes and which way it's going to take your food. But if you have buy a spice from the shelf that is a combination of spices, you'll want to know what that combination is. And so the tube colors, the names on the tube colors almost like spice combinations. They don't tell you what the color actually has in it. The name on the tube doesn't tell you what hue that color is, or what value it is, or what saturation it is. Sometimes it will tell you things like light fastness or the tinting strength, those sorts of things. But if you really know your tube colors according to how much hue does a tube color have in it, what hue does it have in it, and how much of that hue, and is that hue dark or is it light? Because every color we see has those three characteristics. It is a hue, it has a value, and it is a saturation. I mean, every color has a certain amount of hue in it. Some colors have 100%, you might say, or close to 100% of the hue possible in it, and those are fully saturated. That's just my way of describing what saturation is. And then there are other colors like those you see in the pasture behind me that are desaturated. They don't have quite so much hue in them. So we'll go into that very, very shortly. And as always, what we'll do is I have a little, I think it's about a little 12-minute video I've put together for you explaining about how tube colors work. And then, as usual, members can, yes, Studio Insider members will ask questions, and then we'll get the discussion going. And if you're not a member, go ahead and join so you can ask questions. Or if you happen to know a member, you can shoot them a text and tell them to ask a question for you. But that's kind of the cheap way out, isn't it? All right, so I think we probably are ready to gear up and go. Roger, have you got the video ready?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, let's roll that video, and then you ask your questions when the video's over. Here are the colors we see in this lion photo. My question for you is this: what tube colors would you need to mix these colors? Your initial response might be, oh, that's easy, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, and burnt umber. Well, if those three were your choices, of course along with white, how would you get this color and this color? One answer might be to find them in a tube color chart such as this one, but that seems terribly cumbersome. When you can learn how to identify all your tube colors as to what potential they have already built into them. That way you don't have to fret about checking charts or memorizing any sort of combination. That can become a piece of cake when we learn to read color by the color wheel rather than by its tube name. So let's begin there. Every color we see, including the colors in our tubes, fall somewhere in this range right here. The color wheel is a diagram of hue. It shows us the hues relationship, how one primary, when mixed with another primary, gives us a secondary, and how a secondary, when mixed with a primary, gives us a tertiary. Now we can expand the wheel to show us more tertiaries, and that should help give us a little bit clearer idea of how we can use the color wheel to identify our tube colors. Let's go through that with the tube color of yellow ochre. Now to show you how that works, I'm going to pull over my color reader, and we'll just put it right here for the time being. And let's read the color of yellow ochre. Now the reader reads those three characteristics that we see in every color. It reads the hue along this little edge right here. It reads the value of the color according to this little band right here. And it reads the saturation of the color here. So we could see, I grabbed this little point, and as I pull that down, we can see the saturation decrease. So that's how my color reader works. Now, once again, we read yellow ochre. I'm going to read it right here. We can see it's a little bit lighter in this area than it is in here. It doesn't make any difference because it will read the hues in the same way. Now, when we read that, and then we pull this over here, we see that the reader tells us that yellow ochre is actually a yellow orange. And we can see it's a very slightly desaturated yellow orange. You see right here, it's not on the full saturation. So if we pull the full saturation up, this is what we get. And this is yellow orange right here. So the hue of yellow ochre is yellow orange. Now, the reason that's important to know is that then gives us that information for when we're mixing color. The reason it's important to know that it's a slightly desaturated, this is a slightly desaturated yellow orange, is it tells us it's not fully saturated. And what else does it tell us? In this particular yellow orange, or this particular yellow ochre, is a darker value. It's in that almost a middle value range, but on the dark side of middle value. You can see that right here. So that tells us as well that this particular yellow ochre, as it comes out of the tube, is not a fully saturated color. It's a slightly saturated color. It's the hue of yellow orange, and it's in the darker value. Then that enables us to know what to do if we need to raise the saturation. Then we will go for one of our color tubes that is fully saturated. One example of that would be the cadmium yellow deep. Cadmium yellow deep is a yellow orange that's fully saturated. That mixed with yellow ochre then could give us a more saturated version. And then when we mix white with it, we're going to get all these versions right in here. Now that's the fully saturated. Let's go back to there we go. So you can see right here as we read this, as you add white to yellow ochre, then you begin to get these kinds of variations in value. If you need that less saturated, what do we do? Well, that's what's so much fun about using the color wheel. If you need your yellow ochre less saturated, you go right across. This was the yellow ochre, the yellow orange we identified. Go right across the color wheel, and we see that a blue violet that leans a little bit more towards blue than it does violet is going to desaturate that yellow orange. That might give us that more desaturated color we spotted in the lion's mane. You can see right here as I pull that saturation down. So you see, having that information about yellow ochre tells us what we'll need to do in order to use the yellow ochre, but also use other colors, other tube colors, to express those yellow oranges that we see in the lion's mane. Now what about burnt sienna? What role would it play here? If we pull the color reader over, now if we use the color reader to read these colors right in here, we find burnt sienna. But what do we discover about this color of burnt sienna? We see right here it's very desaturated, but it's a red orange. And we see that red oranges exist right over here. Now let's look at that. If we bring the reader over, right here's red orange, and we pull it up here, and we find that color right here, the red orange that leans more towards red. Now that is this particular burnt sienna. Some brands of burnt sienna will lean a little bit more towards the orange of red orange. But see, if you know your tube color that you work with, you'll know which way your color leans. And then we would go through the same process. If we need the burnt sienna to be a little bit more saturated, then we'll know to add a little bit more of the saturated red orange. We have several possibilities in our tube colors. One possibility is cadmium red light that leans slightly towards red orange. If it's too red, then we could add a little orange to it. If we need our red orange less saturated, then we can move right across the wheel to the complement and get blue green. In our arsenal of colors, we have the phthalo green in its variations as blue-green, and we have the Rembrandt Viridian as blue-green. Or we can always mix a blue and a yellow or a yellow-green to get blue-green. The thing is, if we need that less saturated, we know what to do with burnt sienna to get it less saturated. And when we read these colors in shadow of the lion's mane, we see that we have that very desaturated red-orange. You see it right here. And what about burnt umber? Let's bring the reader back over and let's read burnt umber and see exactly what we have here. Well, this burnt umber also falls in that red-orange range. Now you will find also that your burnt umbers will vary according to the manufacturer. Some will be a little bit more red towards the red-orange, and some will be a little bit more orange. So you see it's a very desaturated red-orange. Let's go back to the traditional color wheel now to show you how you can use this system to get to know your tube colors. You can make a splotch of your tube color on the end of a sheet of paper or canvas or any sort of material. Then move that splotch around in front of the color wheel. Now we can see we move it over here. It has no relationship to anything that we see on this side of the color wheel. What we're looking for here is to see if we can locate a color on that color wheel that seems to relate more closely to this color. You just allow your eyes to guide you. And you see, it doesn't really relate that closely to yellow. We can see a relationship to yellow-orange, and we can see a relationship to orange, but we feel that it maybe sits right here, perhaps a little bit in between the yellow-orange and the orange. Now, the best way to test that, to see exactly what that tube color is to take a highly saturated version of what you think that might be. In this case, if you have a yellow-orange, take a highly saturated version of that yellow-orange. If you don't have a yellow-orange, you can mix a highly saturated yellow and red to get that yellow-orange. Then go across the wheel to the complement, mix the complement as you see it across the wheel, and gradually add a little of that complement into the saturated color. The results should be what you see come out of your tube color. If you haven't identified it right, you should be able to recognize, does it have more yellow in it than you found, or does it have more orange in it? So it's kind of a scientific method, but you can use that method, and that will train your eyes so that when you are looking at colors out in your environment or doing a painting, you'll be able to more easily recognize the hues you're going to need in order to mix that color. Always remember as well to take into consideration the value, because color has three parts. We have the hue, we have the saturation. We spent most of our time talking about those two, but we also have the value. So you might get the hue and the saturation absolutely point on, but if you don't have the value right, you might still be confused about it. Let's stop now and give you a chance to ask your questions. Alrighty now. Where am I, Roger? Here I am. Okay. So I wanted to acknowledge Mary Ellen and Marie and Ellen and Sheila, who checked in with us after I'd already greeted those previous people who had checked in with us. Okay, so there is my explanation of knowing your tube colors, and I'm ready for your questions. I noticed while while I was watching the video along with you, I was placing the emphasis on how we can control the saturation better when we actually know what's in that tube, but also we can control the hue as well, because if, for example, we're using a tube color that is relatively desaturated, such as the earth colors, those are the ones that we were focusing on today. If we discover that the color we actually need might need to be a little bit more yellow than orange, we then can add yellow to it. If we know that tube color is made, for example, if the tube color is made of red-orange, but we need the hue that we're actually looking for to be a little bit more yellow, we know then that we can look at the color wheel and see what direction, what we need to add to that to get it more yellow. And so our color wheel will show us that we can add anything that's between yellow or red, orange, and yellow. Any one of those hues can then make it more yellow, depending on how much more yellow. But that's just an example. So I don't know of anything that works better than knowing what the color wheel does for you to help you to understand how to control or how to get the colors you need if you know what hues and the value of that hue and the saturation of the hue is in the tube color that you're using. So if you had any, let me know now. Go ahead and ask your questions if any question came up, or I'm going to have to wing it the whole way. I depend upon your questions to keep these discussions going. So did I need to make a longer video, or do you have questions about the whole business of tube color? Cheryl, if you have a tube color that is desaturated like yellow ochre, is it good to use that to desaturate violet since it is desaturated already versus yellow or other colors interfere? If you need to desaturate violet and if the desaturation of the violet needs to be relatively if there needs to be quite a desaturation of the violet, it will work just as well to use, it need to be kind of a blue or violet, be just as well to use a desaturated color to do that. It's the hue that does the desaturation. And if the hue is already desaturated, that's going to help pull the saturation down. So if the way, pop that color wheel up if you can, Roger, and let me,
The color?
the color wheel, yeah.
I moved over to the other screen, okay?
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Getting Roger to pop up the color wheel so I can kind of point to, and show you what I'm talking about there. The way the wheel works, as you know, that the more complementary a hue is, the easier it's going to desaturate. Well, if that complementary is already desaturated, that's going to require less of it. And so yes, it doesn't really matter. If it works, use it. If it doesn't work, then go to a more saturated color. So hope I didn't make that. Was that answer sufficient? So Mary Ellen's asking, in the example you gave about adding more yellow to a red-orange, do you also need to consider whether the yellow leans towards cool or warm? Oh, that's a good one. Well, think about yellow in terms of cool and warm. If the yellow is cooler, it's going to lean towards yellow-green, like lemon yellow. A lot of the lemon yellows really leaning. They're cooler because they lean more towards yellow-green. Now that, it depends on the yellow. It probably is not enough to desaturate or for that blue in there. There's just a hint of blue in a cool yellow. And chances are, it depends on what you need, but chances are there might not be enough of that cool in there. But the cooler yellow will have a tendency to slightly cool the orange or red orange that you're adding into it. If you're mixing the yellow and the red to get the orange. So I would say that if you really need that to be right on point, if you have the warmer version of yellow, such as that cadmium yellow or cadmium yellow light, I would use that one. But if you only have the cooler version, I think it's safe enough to use that too, because I think the saturation is strong enough. So it would be something that only the sharpest eye would detect. So you don't have to be, we don't have to be, how can I say it, real tight about that. It's the visual effect. It's what it does visually in the long run that we're after. And so if it doesn't affect it too much, then either one of those yellows should work just fine. It requires playing with, as all colors do. At least as long as you know that that's the range that you're reaching for, you should be fine in that. And okay, Cheryl says fine. I'm glad I made that clear. Yeah, warm and cool colors. I know there are a lot of people who like to have on their palettes, which is fine. Well, I'm not going to. It's nothing that you create a judgment about. A lot of people like to have on their palettes a warm and cool version of each of the hues, and so that is a different system or a different way of thinking. I always just think of the hues in terms of which side of the color wheel they're leaning on, and that is going to be either towards a warm or towards a cool. So whatever the system of color mixing is, or whatever the system of setting up the palette is, it doesn't make any difference. Principle works the same no matter what, because of the way what color does to color. And when I say what color does to color, I mean what hue does to hue, when it's just hue mixed into hue, or what whether that hue is in how close those two hues are to each other on the color wheel. So the further those hues are from each other on the color wheel, the greater change is going to be in the new hue that gets mixed, etc. All right, let's see here. Cheryl says, oops, hit the wrong button. I like to chart my tube colors, but is it really to continue? I really have found it important to stay within the brands of paint as often as possible, since they can really be different. Yes, Cheryl, that is extremely important. Decide upon your brand of paint that you like best and stick with it. Now, there's nothing wrong with experimenting with different colors of paint, etc. But it's important to know the brand and know what it will do, especially in those earth colors, but there are other colors too that come out of the tube colors that can vary so much. The one that's called sap green is one of those. My Lord, I have seen over the years variation on that same color coming out of tubes that would go from I've seen a variation that would go from that really, really high saturated green right here to that more Daniel Smith type sap green that is a little bit lower saturated, very dark and transparent. So some of the colors, some of the traditional colors are pretty dependable, like ultramarine blue, for example, and the phthalos, and used to be in the lisrons, and some of the cadmiums. They're pretty dependable because the technique of milling them and producing them has become relatively uniform in most cases. But if you get accustomed to the results of a particular tube color, and you know what that will do, that is a comfort zone in your painting. That is one that you really need, unless you're just want a little shock every now and then. So yes, the other thing I didn't mention in that about getting to know the tube colors is that the quality of transparency and the quality of opaqueness of the colors. Now that won't affect the hue, but it will affect the painting itself, because the more transparent colors have kind of a depth that pulls. Well, they have a different kind of depth. The transparent colors are more, let's see if I get this right, absorbing color. Have I got that right? Where the opaque colors are more reflecting, or absorbing light, where the more opaque colors are reflecting light. So we get a different kind of surface quality with the transparency and the opaqueness. And the other thing I didn't place a lot of attention on was the tinting strength, and that does matter an awful lot, because some pigments have a strong tinting strength. That means that it's going to take just a smaller amount of that pigment to mix into another pigment to change it. And some have a very weak tinting strength. So getting to know the tinting strength is very important, but also getting to know how it registers and what it's going to do is important. I do have a blank chart for charting your tube colors, which I will make available. And I was trying to think this morning, how can I make that available to you better? What I will do after this chat, for all the people who are subscribers and members, check your email, because I'm going to put a link where you can get that blank chart if you'd like to use it to chart your own tube colors. I'm going to put a link for a PDF of that chart in the YouTube email the same email you received for notifications of the chats and those sorts of things. If you see an email coming from YouTube, don't delete it. Check it out, because give me about an hour, within an hour after we finish the chat here today, I'm going to put that link in and send it to you, so that if you're interested in charting your tube colors, which I hope you are, because it can be so beneficial to you to chart your tube colors. If you're interested in doing that, I'll send you that blank that kind of helps guide you for doing that kind of charting. All right, what else do we have here? Cheryl's asking, wait a minute, I can't read that. Oh, yeah. Does opacity affect real saturation? Or is it just an effect of the light on the painting that might make it appear desaturated? Does opacity affect the real saturation? Well, now, that's a good one. I'm not sure that opacity affects the real saturation. I think if you look at the colors behind me, I think that opacity is going to reveal more of the saturation, because the more transparent seems to pull the light into it, and we get I think we actually see the full saturation more clearly when we have through the more opaque colors. And I'm trying to go through the colors of the saturations and whatever. For example, I'm thinking about the Viridian hue by Rembrandt that we all know is fully transparent. Yeah, I think I'm right about that. As it is fully transparent, the more transparent it is, the deeper we look at it. But if I'm thinking about that same color with watercolor, and if we just thin it with water, well, the opaqueness of the paper is coming through there to reveal that saturation to us. So, really, Cheryl, I had never given that one very much thought before, but that's a really good one to consider. I think I'm right about that, though. I think the light reveals more saturation, the more opaque the surface is, the more opaque the surface quality of the paint is. Yeah, that was a good question. That was thoughtful. Let's see, have we caught up on the questions down there?
Yeah.
All right, folks. Now, I keep referring to this. I keep referring to this picture behind me. If you will look on the, if you will look through that picture. I'm going back to this. I'm still thinking about this question that Cheryl asked. If you go back to this question, to this picture, you feel that deeper feeling. If you look at these cows on this side, right behind me here, you feel in these darker colors, there is a depth there that we have a kind of a more transparent quality there in the depth of these colors here. Whereas if we will move over, let's see if I can find something. I don't see anything really saturated over here. Well, it's not really saturated because we do have the light of that coming through, but it's not really saturated. So I guess that's not a good example. All right, so I fiddled with that one for a while. That one is really nice food for thought. I'm sure that I'm going to get a comment on YouTube that gives me one of those scientific answers for that, and that would be, it's probably more theoretical than it is scientific. But anyway, all right, let's see what else we have here. Maurice ask, is that why value range seems darker transparent colors? That's a good observation. Yes, I think so. It's that we feel like we're looking we were looking through the deeper and the darker. Yeah, and I think that also can point to my initial response to that question being pretty on point, and that is that if you take if you put side by side as a test, they put side by side on a painting surface, an opaque black or opaque burnt umber, something that's really, really dark, and then a transparent one, the opaque feels a little more saturated because it's sort of just coming towards us. The opaqueness of it makes it feel like it's coming towards us more. And in other words, it's reflecting more light. It's about the best way. And then the transparent seems to pull light in, and that feels darker to us. It has more depth in it. Larger, not darker. Oh, larger, not darker. Okay. Then I will think about your answer and go, oh, this is Cheryl. Look at my tube color chart. Yeah, I think maybe that one's worth playing with just a little bit. But I think I probably have answered that about as closely as probably anybody could answer it. All right, so the other thing about tube colors I want to point out to you, since we're on that subject too, it does have to do with getting to know your tube colors, and that is the cheap tube colors, the ones that don't cost as much, plus those that cost a little bit more. The process of creating tube colors in paint is a milling process that involves pigments and binder. Those cheaper tubes that you buy have also a filler in them. And it doesn't matter what the company is. I think a lot of the companies these days are doing their professional version and their cheaper version. And they call that student grade. Well, I got to be honest with you, I don't buy student grade crap because I feel like a student needs good quality paint in order to do good quality work or to learn good quality work. And I guess these cheaper paints serve a purpose. I know about budgets. I know about all those things. I know about having to scrimp and have enough money to buy paint and all that kind of stuff. But I think it's better to have fewer really good quality colors than it is to have a whole bunch of cheap ones. Because what happens there, a lot of times it depends on what the filler is that's in the tube color. But if there is a filler, that means that something has been added to the pigment to stretch it out. And that was not going to give you the full strength or the full possibilities of what that color can do if it's got something added to it that kind of weakens it just to make it spread out further. So my advice on that, if you have to make a choice between buying a cheaper version and the professional version, save your pennies and get the smaller tubes of the professional version, and give yourself that much more possibility for getting to know what colors really do. I remember back in the day when they had those powdered temperas for kids. That's how far back I'm remembering. They had those powdered temperas for kids, and you mix water with them and it makes the paint. I don't know if they even have that kind of thing available anymore. And it seemed to work. And then they said they were telling us that yellow plus blue made green. But it so turned out, well, it didn't make a kind of green. But when you would mix that stuff, mix the yellow of that stuff with the blue of that stuff, it made kind of a muddy green. It didn't give us a green that we were really happy with as children. And it's because it was cheap. It wasn't pure pigment. So if you had pure pigment these days, of a pure blue with a pure yellow, and if if that blue doesn't have any violet in it, if it's just a pure spectrum blue or even one that might lean a little bit more towards the greener blue, it's going to give us that. So I don't know why that just came to my head, remembering those days of not being able to get the green I wanted just because it was cheap stuff that our school was providing. And we don't even talk about that. All right, I've got behind here. Let me check. Debbie's asking, I'd like to ask a question, but don't feel like I know enough. Well, Debbie, just ask the question, and don't worry about that you don't know. Don't even know what you don't know. Don't worry about that. Asking questions is the way we find out what we don't know. Okay, Sheila says, paint brands have options well beyond primary and secondary colors. The color wheel allows us to achieve the hues we want, starting for landscape. The same principle would work presumably for portraits. Yes, indeed. You don't even need special colors to work for portraits. All you need are a good standard set of tube colors that are the range, I should say, where you have a good range of possibilities for getting everything from the from the more saturated to the less saturated. Generally, skin tones fall into the less saturated hues. But when you learn to read skin tones as hues and values of hues and degrees of saturation of those hues, you can create any skin tone with just a good set of traditional colors that are representing what the color wheel are representing the colors around the color wheel in some real solid way. So let's see. Powdered temper still exists. Oh, that's a shame. Maurice, I'm sorry to know about that. I wish they didn't. Now, if it's just dry pigment, that's different. That's pure pigment. And a lot of people, especially people who work with egg tempera, and that sort of thing will work with that pure dry pigment. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about that cheap, what they call tempera back in 60, 70 years ago when I was, well, we won't go into that. But anyway, yeah. But if they still exist, I am so sorry to hear it. Cheryl says, why are some of the oil tube colors so different? Even the quality of paint, since the binder is the same, is it the amount of pigment, or in case of Indian yellow, is it a mix of pigments? Well, it may be a combiner. It's not just that. A lot of them will say, give the pigment list, and it will give, say, linseed oil as the binder. But how they're molded, how they're mixed, how they're molded by a type of grinding process. And not only that, but there's the temperature of that is very important as well. And so all of that put together, the degree to which they're ground, the amount of pigment that's in there as in proportion to the amount of binder. And I said before that a lot of times the temperature, yes, and the kind of pigment is going to matter, but all that stuff can go into the quality of pigment and go into answering that question of why the two tubes of paint may have the same labels on them, but they are different when they come out of those tubes. So it's the process. You'll find that some of the companies, like the Rembrandt company, uses a really, really refined process. And one of their goals is to make all their paints the same consistency. But they have a really, really refined process and very, very careful about their selections, very, very consistent and careful about the selection of pigments, about the proportions. And there are some things they're not going to tell about their process. And I can't blame them for that either. And so Gamblin is another one that is really sensitive about their process and about giving that consistent quality of color throughout. By the way, they control the mulling of the pigment, combining the proportions of the amount of pigment, in particular pigment, with the material. Now you'll see some that have linseed oil and some have safflower oil and the oil itself is going to help, is going to determine a lot of the quality or the result of the pigments. And but you can, a lot of those companies you can go into, if you can get deep enough into their website, you can find out exactly, or as much as they'll let anybody know about their process. Winsor Newton, okay, I'm going to step on some toes here, I guess, but I don't find them as committed to the quality as they have claimed to be all these many, many decades they've been producing paint. I think their quality of paint and their consistency of one color to the other has kind of bounced around over the decades, and I don't trust Winsor Newton as much, especially for oil paint. And also it depends upon whether it's oil paint or whether it's acrylic or whether it's watercolor or gouache. But all those processes have their unique methods for combining the pigment with the binder and the process for creating those combinations in terms of their mulling and all like that. So yeah, and yes, and to a great degree it depends upon the pigment, but it's what happens to that pigment that matters in the process, Cheryl. Mary Ellen, Debbie, Diane, Diane is great about figuring out what you're asking. If you don't have the exact words, you might give a question a try. I totally agree, Mary Ellen. Just give me a question of a sort and I'll see what I can make out of it. And Cheryl says, that's interesting. I had no idea pigment particle size. Oh yes, pigment particle size makes a big difference. And the temperature at which it's produced is going to make a difference too. Okay, so if you think about, that's especially evident in the burnt umbers and the raw umbers because they are literally raw burnt sienna, raw sienna, those. It's literally the heat that changes the color. That's the earth colors especially. But it's true with all the other colors. The amount of heat and that temperature while it's being processed is going to determine the quality of color. It also is determined by where the pigment comes from and exactly which pigment it is. Also, a lot of those synthetic pigments that we have today and a lot of the substitute paints that we have available to us are a lot more consistent because they are chemically made, or I should say, not always chemically, well, I guess maybe most of the time.
In a lab?
They're made in a lab. That's a better way to say it. Yeah, and so they're controlled from the very beginning, but still the same. The process of combining those with the binder is still going to make a great big difference there. Okay. Are there other questions? What are we doing on time here? Yeah, we got a little more time left to answer some questions if you've got them. Since the old masters hand mold their paints is why... Oh, no, let me start again, Cheryl, I'm sorry. It says old masters hand milled their paint. Is that why they are so vibrant? Well, the ones that are vibrant, that's one reason, because they had full control. And that's really interesting too, isn't it? Because each master had their own process, and they knew just how much of that milling and the proportions of the binder to the pigment itself, they knew what that was going to give them. So they had full control of it there. And so some are more brilliant than others, and some are some have a stronger lifespan than others. Some lasted better than others. So that control was part of it, and also their process was part of that too, Cheryl. Their painting process, and it depends on how far back we go when we say old masters, but usually we refer to old masters, we're referring to those in the 15th and 16th century. But there are old masters that are represented throughout the centuries, like the 17th and 18th centuries as well. But they began the process of their creating their own paints kind of fizzled out as it became more and more, as paints became more and more widely available commercially. So, all right. Debbie says, are there any do's and don'ts about mixing transparent colors with opaque? No. The quality of the paint is the only thing, and to know that pigment is just pigment and color is just color. The quality of transparency and quality of opaqueness is more about, or its consideration, I should say, is more about its appearance on the canvas than it is about what happens on the palette as far as mixing is concerned. So if you need the color to stay transparent on the canvas, then you wouldn't want to add opaque color into it, but you'd want to layer the transparent color. But if you want, if it's in, as far as it has to do with changing the color or changing the, I should say changing the hue or changing the saturation or even changing the value of the color, it doesn't really, that's not really, you don't really have to take transparency or the opaqueness of the color into consideration. Now, I just heard myself say there the value, and we do know that the value seems richer and deeper the more transparent it is. So if that's a consideration there, then you would want to stick more closely to transparent mixtures to create the deep dark value. But that's about the only thing that comes to mind right now that you would need to be cautious about, Debbie. So I think maybe there's too much concern or caution. Some people think in terms of, well, let's get back up and say it this way. it's not it's not necessary to be fearful about what happens on the palette. The what happens on the palette is going to determine what happens on the painting. And so if you know that you're going to need a more transparent interpretation on the painting, then that's when you would just naturally know that there wouldn't need to be opaque colors mixed into that. So I hope I answered that in such a way that it made sense. If not, ask another question about it, and I'll see what I can do about clearing that up. So let's see. Okay, M. Pratt. There's another name that goes with that, and it's way out of my vision now. Anyway, do you have a favorite book about do you have a favorite book that details colors, or is building the grid the best way to learn how colors behave and interact? I don't have a favorite book. Over the decades, I've studied dozens. What I've discovered there is that the best way is not even grids or reading in books. The best way is playing with the paint. It's using it's the experience of using the color wheel, and mixing by the color wheel. And you can set up little exercises for yourself, for example, where you would some really good exercises would be to maybe start out with their wheel, choose a color on the wheel. Say, for example, if you chose on the wheel the color yellow-green on the color wheel. Now, and now if you chose its complement, which is red-violet, set up an exercise for yourself where you would do a mixture of those colors. Start with yellow-green at its lightest value, and you go to red-violet with its lightest value. So now you've got the lightest values of those two complementary hues. Then gradually add one into the other to desaturate it, and keep doing that until you have it desaturated to a neutral. Then keep adding that color, and you'll see that saturation begin to turn more towards the complement you're using to add to it. And if you can create a range of colors like that, where you've got that single value of two complements, where you've got one gradually added to the other, and you'll see how just adding the two complements to each other at that same value level is going to give you a complete value range of saturation, a full saturation at that value to the complete neutral. Then create another chart for yourself where you would go up a value higher, where you would raise the value of those. And if you do one in the lightest value, if you do another chart in the middle value range of just those two hues, and another chart in the darkest value range where you can still see the hues, keeping them at the same value, that's an invaluable exercise that you can do to get to know what color does to color. So that's one kind. Now, Richard Schmidt has a series of color charts in his book, Alla Prima. Alla Prima, pretty pricey, but well worth the price if you can save your pennies to get it, where you would create those kinds of charts according to the colors that are on your colors that are already your standard colors on your palette. So I would say there are certain kinds of practice charts. The involvement, the experience of controlling mixtures of color with certain intentions is a whole lot better experience to help you to understand what color does to color, or what hue does to hue, than it does to be able to, get yourself deeply bogged down in trying to memorize stuff or get yourself following some theory where you're trying to put it together by some theory. So that's my advice on that one. And as far as I think just the experience. I think if I had one book I'd recommend to everybody, one book on painting and on color mixing, I recommend to everybody. It's just it's Richard Schmid's Alla Prima, because I think he's more practical, especially that section there where he shows you how to mix the color charts. It's the most practical experience, giving you the experience of mixing color that I know of. Okay, am I a little bit behind here? All right, so Marie says, I'm with Cheryl on that. I'm taking it right now, and it's valuable. What is that? Because though I've studied a lot with Diane's quick tips on color, those are like workshops in and themselves. Yeah. So, all right, are we towards the end? Yes, I believe we are. We totally run out of time here. All right, well, thank you all for joining us. This has been you've asked some really, really good questions, and some of them even got me to thinking. So thank you all for joining us. I hope you'll join us again next month, the third Sunday of February, which we'll have another topic, and we'll give that topic a good running through just like we did this one. So thanks a bunch, and bye-bye for now.
I think that commercial pop up too.
You mean we had commercial pop up while we were doing that? Oh.